Welcome to our webinar today, Inside the Minds of Hiring Managers, a panel discussion on hiring in 2023, presented by CareerPlug. In case you're unfamiliar with CareerPlug, we are a hiring software company that helps and supports small businesses in creating an individualized hiring process and automate it and really support them in getting the best people to join their companies. I'm Kirsten Penaloza. I'm the Senior Manager of Client Experience here at CareerPlug, and I am super thrilled to welcome here the three panelists of today, Jim Noone, RaeAnn Lovall, and Paulina Lovall. Jim, I would say kick us off with introducing yourself and then pass it over to RaeAnn, and Paulina, you wrap us up last but never least.
Great. Hi, I'm Jim Noone. I've worked in human resources, employee labor relations, et cetera, for over 30 years with a wide variety of organizations, as you can see on the slide. I'm currently employed as Director of Employee and Labor Relations at the University of Denver in Colorado in the United States. And I'm very excited about the subject matter. I think so much of how we handle interviewing and sourcing candidates really speaks to our commitment to diversity and inclusion, or the lack thereof. So very jazzed about it. RaeAnn, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. I'm RaeAnn Lovall, and I am Chief People Officer at Homebase. We are a technology startup located in Kansas City. And I've been Chief People Officer through hiring, taking us from 12 people to 50 people in less than a year. So had a lot of experience with really selling the startup experience, getting people excited about joining our team, and then kind of going from the honeymoon phase of all those new excited people through the first year and the challenges that have come with that. So we'll be looking forward to having discussion about not only the hiring process, but the onboarding process, and then retention and employee engagement going on from there. Thanks. Paulina?
I like this passing of the torch. I'm Paulina. I'm the co-founder and the COO at Noone. We're a pre-seed startup, so talk about starting from the ground up. My background is in partially music industry, but also tech spaces. So I'm also the general manager at a community called the Digitalog. We oversee and create spaces for music and tech folks. And yeah, in my past, I've grown and scaled teams at the companies listed there. I used to work with both RaeAnn and Kirsten, which is incredible to see their growth as well and their careers really blossom, which is, I wish we could have a separate just fireside chat about that. But yeah, strive to build really inclusive and opening and welcoming spaces for everyone, which can be hard historically in the tech space.
Thank you all for being here and joining in this conversation. And Paulina, I'll make a note about fireside chat. I love talking about career growth, so mental note. All right, hey, a lot has happened. So let's dive into the topic. A lot has happened in the hiring space in the last few years. We've been through that. We've talked about it a lot. So we've seen pandemic-related mass layoffs. Then we've seen the Great Resignation, and then we've seen again like overhiring and overly laying off in the tech world. There's a lot happening, and yet there is a strong labor market that we're observing. At least the data is showing that. As of December 2022, we have more open jobs than we have actually active job seekers that can fill those jobs. We have a very, very low unemployment rate, and we have on a monthly basis for the last 2 to 3 months, actually 350,000 and more jobs being posted by employers. And yet we also are seeing that a lot of employees are still quitting in very, very high rates their jobs. What does it say? That they're very confident about the prospects in the job market. So in very, very simple words, it is a job seeker market right now. And I would say employers are feeling this, maybe even resenting it, at least from what we sometimes hear. And that brings me actually to my first point of myth number 1. Today's job seekers only apply to keep their unemployment money. This is something we frequently hear from employers that have a hard time hiring. So let me actually start with you, RaeAnn. You're the Chief People Officer at Homebase. Why would you say this is a myth or maybe a truth?
I think in our space, especially it's highly technical and especially on the development team and our customer success teams, everyone really wants to be involved in those areas of expertise. If they're applying, it's because they're genuinely looking for a job, usually remotely. That's much more of a trend, obviously, but also because we are a tech startup in an exciting space. We do smart apartment technology. So there aren't a lot of other companies in this space. We're really innovating, making sure that property managers can manage their properties remotely, and that residents have an app that allows them into every door in the building and also gives them a smart home experience. So just the nature of our business and the startup culture is something that I think applicants are really looking for. They want to join that kind of exciting culture. So I personally don't have this impression given my situation.
What about the other two? Where do you think this comes from? Where does this myth even come from? That idea that job seekers don't really want a job when they apply?
If I may, I think so often employers tend to lag in recognizing that there is a job seekers market. They hold to rigid requirements for their positions. They hold to a lower wage or a salary than the market's really demanding. They hold to, they try to shove the genie back in the bottle and saying everybody's got to be at the office all the time, and all these different sort of things. So I think that myth comes from people who are typically not responsive to their market and viewing the labor force as their market, and instead see themselves as doing job seekers a big favor by offering them a job. And that's just not realistic. It's a transaction. Nobody's doing anybody a favor here. You're hiring someone at a certain salary because you think you can get more than that out of them, and they are coming to you because there's a combination of working conditions, wages, benefits, etc., that make it the most valuable option to them. And if you're not being competitive, you're not putting that out on the table, it should not be a surprise that people are not chomping at the bit to get your job.
Yeah. And Paulina, I definitely want to hear what you have to say. I'm just seeing from the chat, there's the impression, or that impression or myth exists because, and I'm looking at my other screen, so if you see me looking to the side, it's because of that. So many people just don't show up for interviews. And there's actually some really interesting data around that. 20% of applicants reject a job because they didn't have a good interview experience. And now here's the big data. 50% of job seekers ghost the company after a negative interview experience. So when we see that, it's because something in the interview process from the beginning and the get-go is just not appealing or not a positive experience. So Paulina, what do you say when you keep all that in mind? What are the challenges that maybe you've seen or not seen, or something that we can do better?
Firstly, +1 to Jim's point, like, I think it comes down to evaluating what the offer is. It is a transaction. It is, we need to fill those roles, obviously, as hiring managers, but the choice is in the hands of the job seeker. To this comment, though, to this point, as an anecdote, last year we were pre-launched. My company, High Note's very small. We're super startups, to RaeAnn's point. Selling the startup experience is its own separate challenge. But we were hiring for a role that we never hired anyone for, and it was really difficult to find. It was a product designer. It is a product designer role. I was actually, of course, ghosted as well during that process, which I was like, oh, wow, this is happening now. And I was surprised, but I took that as a sign that maybe there was something in our process, our communication, how we sold the job, what did our job listing look like, that may have turned, this particular candidate off. We went through and readjusted some of our comms. Obviously I didn't get any feedback specifically from that candidate, but it really took me a moment and took me by surprise to just look back and say, okay, cool, let's react. Let's have the reaction in the moment, but like also let's turn it around and see maybe if we adjust this, like A/B test it, right? Like maybe we adjust this one wording, maybe we adjust the way we talk to folks. Yeah, I can't say it's fully successful because I still haven't hired for that role, but we haven't been as aggressive in hiring for that role this time around. But it's even happening on small teams, I would say, as well. So I wouldn't say it's a complete myth. I wouldn't say that it's completely true. I would just say that it's worth taking a step back.
Yeah, I often talk when I talk to either clients or even within my team, we mention the root cause, right? Like what's the root, what's truly underneath a perception or a story, a narrative that we're telling. And I feel when I hear that kind of statement or myth coming up, it's what I'm not seeing is the understanding of all the things that have changed since the pandemic, right? A lot of people don't want to come back to things that how they were before the pandemic. And that includes working in retail, working in hospitality. Like a lot of those in-person jobs have seen a lot of challenges. And one of those challenges is also the salary expectations are now higher. Job seekers are expecting a higher salary, inflation, costs, like there are a lot of things. And so if employers are not matching those expectations, that's when the hiring challenges actually start, which actually also brings me to the next point, which is more about the experience and the credentials that we often are looking for in candidates. Myth number 2. To get a great job, job seekers need academic credentials and perfect relevant experience. Jim, share with me, why is this a myth in 2023?
Well, I think it really depends on the perspective of the person who's hiring as to what is the academic credential that's necessary. What is the perfect relevant experience? I can tell you that there are people, particularly in the world of academia, who tend to inflate the degrees that are necessary to do jobs within their respective areas. Part of my job is to knock the hell out of those expectations and remind people that we talk about inclusiveness, we talk about diversifying, we talk about finding people from different backgrounds. Well, then they're not all going to have the exact same experience that you do or I do. And that's fine. I used to work in public radio and podcasting, and in the newsroom, we were reviewing everybody's job descriptions, and all the journalist positions had a minimum requirement of a bachelor's degree from an accredited journalism program. And I was able to sort of approach the managing editor of the radio station and say, if there's somebody who's been writing up a storm for Slate and they never got their college degree, do you care? Would that stop you from hiring that person? And her answer was no. And so we ended up replacing all of those bachelor requirements with or equivalent professional experience. Similarly, industry experience, I find, is something that's overrated by a lot of hiring managers. I think if you have the skill set underlying the work that's going to be done, and that is far more important than specific industry experience often is. Again, it's another gate that's put in people's paths, or a door that's put in people's paths that's really not terribly necessary. So that's it for me.
Thank you. RaeAnn, if I remember well, you kind of started your career, did you start your career in the startup world and tech world, or did you pivot into the tech world?
Kind of always been in small business startup, and after my MBA, the startup I worked for was a tech company, and then from then on out, it's definitely been in technology spaces. I'm not personally a technician, but just being in that space, soaking up that culture and that knowledge, and really the understanding that I can teach myself anything. Like if there's a tool, I will figure out how to use it. And I think that is actually to this question or to this myth is what we're looking for. The person who has a growth mindset, who will come in and say, I can learn, I can problem solve, I can work with other people. Not only can I do that, I want to do that. That's going to feed me. That's going to give me satisfaction in my working experience. And that is the number one thing that we look for. It's not a college degree. The founder of the company doesn't even have a college degree. So he's extremely passionate about that not being a qualification. I would say that it's sometimes difficult to find that person that actually has that drive, because I'll interview people, I'll sell that startup experience. You won't be stuck in a role here. You'll be able to learn, you'll be able to grow. People won't tell you, no, that's not an idea we can, look at. They'll actually collaborate with you and give your ideas a chance. We don't have processes that are in place sometimes. So you will get to develop the process. And, sometimes people seem really into that, and then you get them in and they're like, why isn't this process developed? Or that isn't my job. Why should I have to, stretch into that? And so that, I think, sometimes happens, but really trying to find that person that has that growth mindset and they've demonstrated that in the past is the number one thing that we're looking for.
Yeah, thank you. We also just had someone in the chat saying we hire for the attitude and train for the skill. Paulina, do you have experience in applying that in the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, just like you, RaeAnn, I feel like the startup, I'm trying to think of like the startup culture of, hey, if you have shown evidence that you're willing to do the work, like we look for that. I also don't have my degree, and which, by the way, I'm working on it, just letting y'all know. In my mid-30s, I'm getting my bachelor's degree. But I didn't have it when I went into my career, and I started as a support specialist. And that team, that space, when you start in a lower entry level space, you really have the opportunity to, if someone gives you that chance, to give someone else that chance, right? All the credentials at the time when I was looking for that initial job was, bachelor's degree for a support specialist role that was paying $13 an hour. And yeah, of course, it required some technical skill, but at the end of the day, to that point, have the attitude, you can learn the skill. And that became kind of our recruiting method in that space. And I've taken that everywhere I've gone. So yes, there are some departments and some levels of employees where you can create that, hey, why don't we build up just like a really, really good training program? Like, that's the best that we can do for this entry level job. Let's get people in that wouldn't traditionally be welcome to this space, this industry, to this job, and give them that opportunity. That has worked best for me in every turn. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I was just like really impassioned by what RaeAnn just said, and thinking through kind of like my personal story there as well. It's hard to identify sometimes, but yeah, I don't know. I think if you have the team that's on the same page about how to uplift those who traditionally may not be uplifted, you got to put in the effort, and it takes time. Sorry, I should also add, it takes a ton of time. You're not gonna turn this around in 30 days. It's probably gonna take a little bit longer than that.
And RaeAnn, you mentioned growth mindset, like you truly look for that person and maybe that's what you all are referring to as attitude, like the right attitude. I mean, what is the right attitude? And growth mindset is part of it. And I'd say that's one of the skills to bring to today's work space anywhere, no matter what industry, no matter on what level. When I look for candidates, I look really for that coachability and that mindset of, I want to grow. I'm here and this is what I'm doing and this is what I want. And I want to be developed and I want to give me that feedback, even if it's tough feedback, constructive feedback, but help me get to that other level that I want to be. But talking of hiring, how do we actually interview for that? How do we find those candidates? How do we incorporate that in our entire hiring process so that we one, don't exclude those resumes that don't have that experience or credentials, but also we don't just hire for other like-minded people, or like, you know, what I often see, like, oh, we're hiring for cultural fit. Yes, it's true, like values, mission, purpose of a company should resonate with a candidate, but we don't want to just hire the same people, right? We want to hire for diversity. So how do we incorporate exactly that into the hiring process? Anyone can go.
Are you asking how do we incorporate diversity, or maintaining diversity when you're looking for a similar or one trait?
I think it's both. It's a combination of. So diversity is always part of the conversation. When we talk about hiring for an attitude, how can we make sure that we're not hiring just like many Jims and many Kirstens that all have like a growth mindset, right? But we really truly also look for like, okay, where are they? And how can I individually make sure that they are set up for success? Like, how do we create an interview process that keeps all that in mind that we're just discussing, of like skills, attitude, and diversity, which is another topic, but it can be weaved into everything.
Yeah, definitely. So one issue I see is hiring for those people that will say yes to a challenge, but they're also going to say yes to whatever the founder says. They're going to have, yes, I can do that. Yes, that sounds right. Yes, I'm on board. And that attitude is rewarded. And then when someone says, no, that doesn't make sense, we should approach it from a different way. They still have a growth mindset, but they're going, at it from a different approach. So in my interviewing, it's, when have you attacked a challenge? And tell me about that, and what obstacles were in your way, and how did you get support or not in that endeavor? And then how have you maybe, dealt with challenge or interpersonal struggles? How have you, dealt with a disagreement with another employee? So that you kind of get both perspectives, how they would actually handle a disagreement, and then, how they've handled exhibiting that growth mindset. And then I think the diversity comes in really how you recruit and where you recruit, but getting that level of attitude or personality diversity is, I think, yeah, that's basically what I just described. Sorry.
Paulina, I know you're very passionate about building diverse teams. How do you weave that into your hiring?
So some of the questions RaeAnn just mentioned are some of the questions, like what's a challenge you've had? How do you handle someone disagreeing with you? Of course, that's just some interesting questions that we throw in there. I always add maybe, what are you passionate about? Because what I'm looking for when someone asks, what are you passionate about? Or when I'm asking that question is, I may be talking to someone, I'm going to go into a little anecdote here. I was talking to someone who I hired for one of my last teams, who didn't fit the qualifications, had the education piece, but had never worked in tech. And we couldn't identify whether or not this person could walk someone through a technical process without us asking, walk us through a technical process. But they didn't have the vocabulary for that because they're not from our environment. So I asked them, what are you passionate about? And they said, rebuilding furniture. And I was like, interesting. Like, I know nothing about rebuilding furniture. And so I asked them, I was like, great. Can you talk me through like a piece that you just made? And they talked me through in very technical terms on, to them, and explained how they rebuilt like a piece of furniture. And that showed me a skill set that you can't get out of like some of the questions that you would ask someone about, like, how do you tell someone to turn a computer on? How do you troubleshoot this thing? Of course, no one's going to know that. But that was a moment where I was like, okay, I could identify like, okay, cool. I'm already recruiting from a specific space, to your point, RaeAnn. And here I am having this conversation with someone on paper that doesn't look like they're qualified at all for this role, but in fact is able to do this. And that person is now an engineer. Like, so it's really interesting to kind of pull out some of these, I wouldn't even say what is your passion is not a traditional question, but it's not really a traditional question, but it says a lot about a person. Does the person care about something outside of work? Can they explain what that something is to someone else? Are they excited about it? Are they building? They were also building like their little furniture business, right? Like they had the ambition to also like get furniture off the street, rebuild it and resell it, So I was able to identify all those bits about like meeting challenges, building your own business, but also being able to explain that to someone who doesn't understand. I think that answers the question, but that's how I like to identify folks like that.
Thank you. Jim, from your perspective, how can we as hiring managers look for transferable experience? And I think that talks a little bit, like Paulina talked a little bit about it. And from how do you look for that?
Well, and I love Paulina's example, and I think it speaks to what's necessary to get to the core of what you're looking for. Frequently, we're looking for people who have critical thinking skills. We're looking for people who can push back in a professional fashion and clearly articulate why. But we're also looking for people who, when it doesn't go their way, are also capable of kind of jumping on board when the train's going a different direction. And in terms of interviewing, it's a little bit limited because, of course, shrewd people at interviews kind of know more or less what's coming. I like to, it's a little bit corny, but the STAR interviewing technique, where you talk about a situation or a task that you were presented with, something that actually happened, the action you took, and the result that came of that action. I'm not interested in hearing hypothetically how people would handle situations, because they're not going to be dealing with hypothetical situations when and if they come to work for us. I'm interested in how they've handled those types of situations in the past, when they've had to push back against someone in authority because they knew that that person in authority was doing the wrong thing. How were those situations handled? And it need not be work experience. It can be volunteer experience. It can be experience that they had in school with their family. I'm less interested in, again, it being very specifically and narrowly drawn to the job that I'm looking for, so much as assessing that there is that teachability. I'm looking also for someone, and this was referred to earlier, who is going to be a work in progress on their deathbed. That's what I aspire to be. And that's what I want people to be. And it need not mean, I think sometimes employers pathologize people who aren't interested in sort of climbing a traditional ladder. I also want to make a point of making sure that just because you don't want to become the director of whatever or the chief whatever, that's held as a mark against you. There are lots of growth mindsets, and it can be a growth within my profession, within my craft, within my career, or it can be personal growth. Guess what? Not everybody comes to work to fulfill their life's ambitions. Some people do come to work to collect a paycheck and then go home and recreate furniture and sell it on eBay. That's fine. That's fine. Just bring 100% when you're at work. So again, I think delving into those things, and again, I think Paulina, your question about passion is terrific, because you really are hiring a whole person. So I hope that's responsive.
Definitely. And it's true, and it connects actually to the next myth, which is we're hiring for the whole person, and that becomes more and more relevant when we think about remote plays. So myth number 3 is everyone wants to work from home or remotely, so they don't need to work hard. And I think we're starting to talk in that area, because when we work remotely and we're at home, we don't just like we don't jump into a different outfit. We just step out of our office. Sometimes we work from the living room or the kitchen. Like, there is no division anymore. So I'm curious to hear from, I know Paulina, you have been working remotely for not only yourself, but also with teams and hybrid teams, I believe, for many, many years. Like, where do you think this misperception of remote work comes from?
People who enjoy micromanaging. I mean, I think it's tough because, and I think we're all guilty of it, right? I'm sure we've all had team members where looking at their stats at the end of the week. Let's say we work in a customer facing role, or we look at the projects that they were supposed to finish in 2 weeks and we're like, what's going on? Why didn't they finish it? And we asked those questions, but guess what? That was happening before we were working from home. So regardless of whether or not you're in the office or working remotely, we still have these questions. I think honestly, the hardest part about remote work is making sure the team feels engaged and isn't exhausted by staring at a screen all the time. That's actually the real problem. It's more like we're so attached to work that we are probably working more than we're supposed to be working. I think that's the real issue. So yeah, I don't think that everyone wants to work from home because of that reason. I think that working from home creates more inclusivity for folks who maybe can't commute to an office because they don't have a car in a place that doesn't offer public transit, or they have kids, or they have other personal matters to attend to in their family. Maybe they have an elderly parent, but working from home is a really good option for them. That actually introduces another subset of folks into the workforce that haven't been able to be part of it before. So yeah, that's the myth. That's my experience. And yeah, I've had very, very functional, successful teams work from home and remotely. So it's tough to say otherwise.
RaeAnn, I know that sorry, you go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump in there. I don't think it's that they want to work from home so they don't need to work hard. I think it's because they want to be able to work more efficiently. They want to know what the output that's expected of them is, and then they want to figure out through automation, through, even outsourcing some parts of their job, whatever it is, where they can get the most output in the least amount of time. And that's efficiency. And that comes from having very clear expectations. And like Paulina said, not micromanaging. And it feels, at least from my perception, most people feel that there's less micromanaging when they aren't sitting in an office and a supervisor or founder isn't tracking how long their butt is in the seat, essentially. I know for me, yeah, I feel pressure to eat through lunch or stay in the office for, 8 hours straight without any breaks because we're a startup, but also because I'm sitting there and everyone can see me. Whereas at home, I'll get things done as quickly and efficiently as I can so I can get up and take my dog for a walk. So I think the fault here really lies in the management and the expectations and the outputs that are clearly articulated to employees so that they can work in the way that's best for them.
Jim, in your more like in the University of Denver, do you run into any of those challenges or like people that are looking for remote work?
Well, it's interesting that you say, because we just implemented a flex work policy university-wide. And what it allows is for each school within the university or department division to assess which jobs are eligible for remote work, really hybrid work, mostly we're looking at. We want to make sure we're still available to students and that the campus is a vibrant place, but that to the extent possible, that we want to encourage those areas to provide hybrid opportunities for their employees. Some do not wish to do so. Those who do not wish to do so and thinks people want to be at home so that they don't work hard. Again, it was stated that they're the micromanagers. They're the people who presume that if they don't have their heel on the back of your neck, that you're going to be slacking off. And the reality is I actually came here from a job where I was working full-time remote, and I loved it. I like having the interaction face-to-face with people in the office, but I also love the idea that if I needed to, I could go over to the Department of Motor Vehicles, take care of my issues there during the day. And then if I was working till 7 or 7:30 that night, cleaning up some other things and not having to commute home after work, I didn't resent it. It was just, it's interesting because it does all sort of blend. And it's possible to get carried away and making work part of everything else. But it's also possible to kind of view that as a liberating thing, that you're not chained to the desk like RaeAnn was talking about. I think there's a great deal of value to that. And yeah.
Yeah, and I heard, two of you say micromanaging, and for me, there's underlying trust issue, right? When a manager is micromanaging a direct report or an employee, either they don't trust that they're doing the work or that they're not qualified to doing the work. And if it's the trust that they are not qualified, then there's something about maybe you didn't hire or you didn't train them. So ultimately it comes back to the hiring manager and the training and onboarding or providing the resources to execute the job well. And if it's not trusting that they're doing it well, then it's setting expectations. So either way, I feel like quite often the manager needs to reflect and go inwards, and it's like, why do I feel like the need to micromanage? And it's also about communication, right? Remote work, we see a shift that we need to communicate differently. We interact differently. A lot of people think that working remotely, we lose the personal aspect. And I very often disagree. I've been working with remote teams for many, many years and have beautiful, very personal connections with the people around me. But a lot of it is truly working on that trust and delivering or like providing all the resources for people to work remotely. But someone actually mentioned hybrid work in the chat, and that's another thing. And I like, Xenia, I think it was you shared that your company's interviewed or surveyed 1,300 roughly people, and 85% prefer hybrid workspaces. And so there's also another opportunity for employers to jump on that and provide that kind of balance, right? It's like in office, but also remote work, so that we can balance work life and needs personally. All right, looking at the time, let's see. So far, we've talked about several myths and underlying issues, or root causes is one of my team's favorite words. What would you all tell, now that we uncovered some of those challenges and the root of them, what would you tell other hiring managers to stop doing immediately so that they can have successful hires?
That's hard.
I would recommend maybe not stop doing immediately, but start examining their assumptions.
Yeah.
Examine their assumptions about what is actually necessary to be a success in this role, with this organization, with this client base, whatever it is. Really start to second guess those things. I can tell you one thing that really annoys me was the term quiet quitting that was floating out there. You saw it all over the media. And really what it was disengaged employees. It wasn't quitting. It was just, they're alienated and their employers aren't communicating with them effectively. They are frequently intimidated about communicating with their employer in a very frank way, and everybody loses in that scenario.
Yeah. It's like the safe space, right? If the safe space is not there, you will have disengaged employees. Yeah.
And the unfortunate reality is there are plenty of workplaces where the employers reinforce with employees that we say we want you to push back, we say we want you to challenge the status quo, but when it actually happens, there are repercussions for that. And they're often not very outfront repercussions. It may not be anything terribly obvious, but it's something that permeates an organization and sends the message to people that I should just shut up and do what my boss says. And if that's the culture that you have developed, by all means, stop doing that immediately.
Very true.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think one thing to stop doing, Kirsten, you had mentioned this earlier, the hiring for culture fit. Especially in our small company, we rely on referrals, and a lot of people are referring their friends. It's difficult because they're selling it as this great opportunity to get on the ground floor of a company. They probably do have a similar work ethic and drive, and yet that is what creates that sameness and the lack of diversity. So I would say stop just hiring someone because they're a referral. Obviously, it's a very important channel for getting applicants, but just because someone likes them and has been friends with them forever doesn't mean that they're going to be the best fit. So I think that's really hard to discern and to manage kind of those relationships when employees are wanting to refer people in their network.
Thank you. Paulina, any thoughts on what you would tell others to stop doing or maybe start doing?
Yeah, I feel like I gave a to Jim's no as well as RaeAnn's. Because that would have been mine too. I was gonna say like I'll say this piece. I would say stop ignoring the issues, you know, the reasons why people don't apply for a job, or maybe the reason why someone gets through to this particular round and there just happens to be this one interviewer that's difficult to talk to or is causing candidates to feel intimidated, you know, like don't ignore that. You know, there's something there and we all know it. I don't need to say it, you know, none of us need to sit here and say it, but when you are in the seat of hiring people, you have some sliver of power to make a difference so that people can actually get hired and have an enjoyable process and actually work at a place that isn't toxic and just isn't a safe place to work. I think that is really difficult. I know plenty of friends in the same space, and yeah, I understand, but I don't know, to the best extent that we can, stop ignoring the problems.
I love it. Stop ignoring the problem should be like something that I'm going to write down and put there, because I'm very, very keen on accountability. Accountability is so important to have successful teams, but accountability starts with yourself, right? It's self-accountability. Yeah. Am I doing the right things? And am I fully honest with myself and the practices that I'm engaging and putting out there? So I love what you just said. All right, moving to our next part. What's the best advice you can give today, job seekers? So not hiring managers, but what can you tell job seekers that are looking for a job? What can they walk away with today that can help them find a good job, at the job that resonates with them and who they are as a whole person, as we said earlier?
I'll go first. Tailor your resume to every single role. Do not put a resume out there and expect that people are going to match it for you. Look at the qualifications, make sure that you're including relevant experience, and you can't just spray and pray, as they say. You really have to decide where you want to invest your time and energy, what companies you want to work for, do the research, find a contact there, get to know them, have coffee, learn about the company, and then make an effort to apply to that specific job. That you're just going to have the most success doing that.
If I may piggyback on that, I absolutely agree with you, RaeAnn. In addition, don't rely on applications. Don't rely on sending resumes out into the ether and expecting to get results. Build your network, identify who can connect you to that hiring manager directly or indirectly, and make those connections. Attend professional association meetings, go to educational conferences, volunteer to sit on panels, and when people send you LinkedIn invitations, connect with them. Doing all of those things. I once applied for a job handling labor relations at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I was very excited about the job. It would be a big change from working in the warehouse in the South Bronx for Coca-Cola that I was working at. And I never got a call back. And then the position got pulled. And a month later, they reposted the position. And I said to myself, they may hate Jim Noone by the time this process is over, but they're damn well going to know who he is. And at the end of that, I was working at the Met. You know, so bang down the doors, be persistent, utilize your network and grow your network. And don't be shy about asking colleagues, present colleagues, former colleagues, friends, to help you jam open that door.
Love it.
But be nice about it too. I would say, yeah, no, 100%, Jim. I love that. That's, man, I feel like everyone on this panel has that type of story, by the way. I think every single one of us has done our work as well. And it does, and sometimes I do think about those moments and I go, what did I do differently? I'm like, well, I did this, you know, and I'm like, okay, how do I tell someone to do those 18 things that, you just mentioned, Jim? But in relation to a question, I know, RaeAnn, you answered it, but Alex actually asked a question about like ATS, how to get past that in terms of being a job seeker. RaeAnn said it, look at the job description, try to match those keywords. If that does not work, then do the Jim method, right? Like there's kind of, when roles are very competitive, I'm in the music industry. The music industry space is insanely competitive and has a lot of nepotism, but it is about who you know, and that's the industry. And whether or not I'm okay with it is a separate conversation we can have for later. But it is about that. It is about growing your network and getting into conversations, volunteering. Folks, I'm like, volunteer for your favorite music focused organization. I think that seems, especially if you're trying to pivot jobs, it's a big question I get a lot. If you have an industry you really want to get into, show that you want to get into that industry. Spend a couple hours a month, like go to an event, host an event in person. It's hard, it's extra work. I do get that, and it is an extroverted activity. I do definitely deeply understand, but maybe do an online panel. There are options that maybe work, but that's the best advice. RaeAnn and Jim said it all.
Thank you. So RaeAnn, you mentioned personalize or make every resume, like tailor it to every job post. What do you all think about cover letters nowadays? Yay, nay, when yes, when no?
So if I were applying, I guess maybe I'm old school, I would do a cover letter, but it's not something I really care about when I'm looking at applicants.
I typically include a cover letter. Again, I am old school because, well, I'm old. But depending on the role, it could be sort of a creative cover letter. I had one where I sort of marketed myself as HR Jim, kind of like G.I. Joe, with an eagle eye for compliance issues and a kung fu grip on the strategic blah, 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 blah. And it was eye-catching, and I'm sure some people looked at it and said, oh, that's cute. I never want to meet this person. But I did get calls from other people, and it did get replicated and put up on people's websites for ideas for how to present a resume in a new way. And I grew that network as a result. And the fact of the matter is, I present myself as me. I don't try to fit myself into the mold of what I think this person's wanting, because it's me who's going to show up on day one, which may be fine. But if it's me who shows up on day 600 and I was presenting myself and selling myself as somebody different, that's not going to work out.
Yeah, I'm sensing another theme, kind of underlying theme of like, we talked about the whole self, right? Like we're talking to a whole human being, and in a remote space, we present ourselves as we are. We see often the backgrounds. I mean, I blurred mine right now, but most of the time people see where I am and how I live, and this is how I look when I work. And the same here. It's like a cover letter, a resume should show in one way or another who you are, because that's how you will show up, whether in office or hybrid or remote. Like that's the authenticity is definitely something that we look for, and maybe that's even part of the entire conversation. So whether cover letter, yes or no, it's more like an individual choice. A lot of hiring managers don't look at them necessarily as a requirement. They can be helpful, especially when we don't have either related experience or someone is pivoting and you're like, why is someone that has been like, I don't know, like an HR professional now wanting to be a carpenter? It's like, walk me a little bit through what's happening that you're passionate about. So for that reason, yes. So I'm sensing there's like underlying that part of the conversation as well. Paulina, I see you're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, yes to all of that. I used to be an anti-cover letter person because I didn't look at them as a hiring manager, but then I went into a space where it was like required, and I was like, oh, interesting. And so I would just like read the cover letters, and I'd be like, I don't know, tell me what's up. I will say this though, if you're a job seeker, like, vary it up. Also send the right cover letter. That's probably a given, but some people forget to do that. But, it doesn't need to be a dear sir, madam, or, all of that. I appreciate just like a hi there. That's great. Or if you know who the recruiter is, hey, recruiter. It doesn't need to be so specific. And I know sometimes we need formulas, but if you can stray away from the formula a little bit or create your own formula, I would recommend that too, because when you're reading, I'm sure just like everyone here, when you're reading tons of cover letters, it does become a little repetitive. So.
Yeah.
One last thing that I'd like to say is, while I try to present the real me, I don't present the whole me in any job. There is a good 5 to 8% of me that is not appropriate for any workplace.
Of course. Of course, we all have that.
So let's forget about bringing my whole self.
True.
There is part of me that should remain in a little dark chamber that is only known to my wife and close friends.
I think that's a fair point, and you're right. That's a good call out. So bring most of your authentic self and remain
Most
some
of yourself.
Yes. R-rated stuff for yourself. All right. For the sake of the time, I know that there was one more slide, but we already talked a little bit about your hiring process within all the other topics. So I'd love to hear any questions that our audience has. If there anything, and I think Natalie is going to help me with any questions that are coming through the Slack channel, not Slack channel. I'm so used to Slack, through our Zoom channel here.
Yes. So y'all have been doing a great job actually kind of keeping up with the chat and questions that are coming through. One that came through the Q&A that I'd like to pose, since around the remote workforce conversation, there are some people probably on this call who that might not be as much of an option for brick and mortar, right? Retail businesses, places that need folks physically on site. And this person said, especially on nights and weekends. So what are maybe some solutions or answers, right? When you're having this, we're having this conversation about remote work and hybrid work, that's the way to go. How do employers respond to that, who really might not have that as an option? How do they still attract great candidates?
If I may, I think it's about the culture that you offer. What is your total employment value proposition? What are you bringing to the table as an employer? And it's not just a paycheck. When I was at the Met, obviously security officers could not work remotely. They needed to be present. They derived great satisfaction from walking through these galleries with masterpieces of art in them, and from interacting with the public, and from just sort of an atmosphere and environment that was welcoming and made work a fun, interesting place to be. Some places, like the night shift working security at a construction site, that's going to be a bit more of a challenge. But frankly, there are people who want a nice, peaceful, quiet place to work and to be by themselves and be with their thoughts. There are ways of marketing this and finding the right person for the right job. Admittedly, some are more challenging than others.
Jim, I like that security guard thing because I think about that often, especially at night. But I used to work an overnight shift once upon a time at a tech job remotely. That was a very particular thing that I did for about a year. And it was 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. It wasn't great, but I was new and I just watched TV shows. Well, I sat there and it was fine. It wasn't great. It's not a long-term thing, but we did kind of try to create a rotation out of that because it is a little bit hard if that's not what you prefer, to Jim's point. But I worked in retail a ton. I spent 7 years working in retail. Yes, I was a college student, so it is very different. But there were differences in my retail experience from one company to the next. And I will say that like the last retail place I worked at, great, decent pay back then. They have better pay now. Great insurance, great benefits, safe, fun place to work. Like it was tough, doing customer service in person is not easy. But brick and mortar, there are options, and it is just about creating a space that people want to be. I have friends that have worked in kitchen stores for many years, right? And what they do, they also have a band, so they can tour during the summer and work during the year, right? There are people where there are lifestyles that work with a retail environment like that. It is identifying those folks. And I understand it's a challenge. It's a whole other set of challenges that maybe folks at this panel don't necessarily have, but yeah, there are ways.
I would say you're in any job, in any industry, the relationship with your direct manager. Hire good managers, make sure they are trained and paid well, and then they will create that environment of trust and safety and fun that people will want to come and stay. The other thing is, we do have some employees that are required to be on site, or they're required to travel and do installs. So we just give them a lot more flexibility. So however you can offer flexibility, if that's giving more paid time off, or childcare assistance, whatever that is, so that you can make it easier on them to work, and more appealing, obviously, to have some more restriction what you have to do, but the trade-off of some flexibility and support in other ways.
Love it. Here at CareerPlug, we have one thing actually. It's we look for outcomes rather than for the time necessarily, or like the hours in a given day that you spent on something. So yeah, love it. I know we're time, so I don't think we will have a chance, and Jim had to hop off already. We won't have a chance for more questions, but thank you for joining us today, Paulina and RaeAnn, and Jim already hopped off for joining us, and be honest about your experience. And thank you to all the participants in the chat for the very engaged conversations that we had there. We have recorded it. You will get the recording so you can review it and write down all the interview questions. I think that was one part of the questions as well. So again, thank you all. This was great. I love the conversation that we had, and I wish you all an amazing hiring, amazing job hunt, and an amazing day. See you all soon.
Thanks, Kirsten.